This episode of the Canceled Misfits Show, we're looking into what is going on in the world of drag, and specifically, why are child drag performers becoming a thing, and why is all of this even wrong? Also, we look at where it's going and answer that question, which is, of course, headed towards pedophilia, which we do not want. If you like it, subscribe, comment, and also hit the little bell. It'll ding every time you wake up, but it'll be worth it because you'll see all of my content. Enjoy today's episode of The Canceled Misfits Show. So, we know that having kids at drag shows is not a new thing. We've had in Dallas, there was a big uproar a few months ago over kids being at an overly sexualized drag show. It's happened in Florida. Videos are popping up all over the place of men at these events wearing giant rubber breasts, and they aren't even, they're fake female breasts, and they're not even doing the courtesy to these kids of covering them up. They're just flopping around. I kid you not. I kid you not. You can go look it up, but I wouldn't recommend it. You see, they're out flopping all around, and these young kids that these parents who are bringing these kids to these shows, they're hiding behind them scared, and the parents are like, hey, go tip the weird guy $1. You see his pants right there? Just put it in there. Just slide it on in. And these kids are 4 or 5. If you look at these videos, these kids are 4 or 5. In Tennessee, it's even worse. There's a show with video footage that I cannot put on here, just for decency's sake. But it is straight up where a young child is rubbing the groin area of a drag queen. Now, supposedly they put out that this was a biological woman. Maybe. Doesn't make it any better. You have a child who is rubbing the groin area of an adult who is themselves being sexually, I don't know, there's no other way. It's being sexually active around these kids out in public. They are taking this out into the streets. In fact, there's been pride parades that I'm sure you've seen if you watch the news at all. You'll see these pride parades where grown men are going around in thongs and bondage gear being whipped by other men. And then you see in the crowd, these families have brought their kids. But now that's not enough. That's not enough. Just having their kids watching this is not enough for these weirdo sick freaks. No, they have to be more interactive. Now they're starting to have stripper poles and instructors for kids. As you can see in the video I'm about to play, it's not good.
I'm trying to climb up.
Yep.
Alright, go! Yes, sir!
That particular parade just popped up. It was in Pennsylvania. It was partially taxpayer funded, and also had a letter of support from the governor, who has not retracted that since. And as we continue down this slippery slope that is not at all foreseeable, no one ever mentioned that when Obergefell went through the Supreme Court, for all intents and purposes, legalizing gay marriage, no one could have ever seen that it wasn't the whole, let us do what we want in our own bedrooms, that they put it out to be. No. No one could have seen that this was going to be in the streets where kids have a look at this filth. These weirdos running around with no clothes on, doing perverse acts to each other in the street, in front of these kids, and that families would bring them to see this. But it gets worse. Because as soon as you see all of these weirdo drag queens that are having kids being brought to them, well, now it's not just weirdo adults in drag at these places. No. That's bad enough. But then we meet Vanellope. So who is Vanellope? Vanellope is an 11-year-old boy who, quote unquote, does drag. Back on the 23rd, just this past Sunday, he performed in Old Nick's Pub in Eugene, Oregon. This was their Facebook post. You can look it up. It's actually really easy to find them right now on Facebook. It says, "Are you excited for Drag Queen Storytime Brunch this Sunday morning? Well, let's meet our performers. Vanellope is here to show you what a 11-year-old drag queen can do." Come on, if you're going to be perverse and evil, at least have decent grammar. It says, "With all the charm and sweetness of a bowl of sugary cereal, Vanellope is here to brighten up your morning with all of," their words, "her drag talent." So a few things. First off, I actually found video that they posted themselves of this event on their Facebook page. And I'm pretty happy to say that it's practically empty in there. I think they brought in more drag queens than they had weirdo parents. I mean, it is a bar at 11 o'clock on a Sunday, 11 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, but still, there's weird parents who at this point do not need to be parents, dragging their kids to this farce. But there weren't many of them in Oregon, thankfully. They definitely didn't recoup the cost of operating that they had, which is great in my opinion, including the $2,000 extra of security that they had to hire. And this would be great if it weren't for the fact that some people actually showed up and participated in violence. Can't get behind that. If they'd just shown up and they needed the extra security just in case something happened and they went bankrupt because of that, I could stand behind that. But unfortunately, there was some violence. But they did put up a post afterwards, basically begging people for money so that they could do this again and again, which is pathetic. And I 100% hope that if they continue to keep going down this path, they go bankrupt and become a forgotten memory. I hope that they shut down. I hope all of these places that are doing these perverse things with men and boys and having kids there and these weird parents. I cannot get over how weird it is for you as a parent to bring your kid to a burlesque show. That's what it was. If it was actual women doing this, most people wouldn't bring their kid there, no matter how it was marketed. But because it's men doing it, somehow it's better. It's because it's men doing it with caked on layers of makeup and terrible wigs and awful stage names and just a whole lot of grotesqueness. It's somehow all right. It's not all right. And that's the problem. Because there are deep truths at war here, not only involving around children doing drag, which most people would agree is a big no-no, but also adults. See, many conservatives would say that absolutely children doing this is wrong. But then a lot of even conservatives will go back and say that as long as they're all consenting adults there, it's fine. And there are a few reasons for this. Some people truly libertarian on the issue. They may think it's wrong, but it's not their place to butt into anybody else's life. And that as long as you leave me alone, it's fine for whatever reason. As if the slippery slope that keeps being proven true doesn't exist. Some people actually, it's a fight that they don't want to engage in. They either don't care, they don't have the time, or they may lose friends and opportunities for speaking out against it. And then there's, of course, people who don't think it's actually morally wrong. You sick freaks. Whatever the reason, we as conservatives are losing on this issue. Hear what you're saying. Every time one of these pops up, if you're watching any sort of news, you hear, there was a giant protest out there, it shut it down, or, they had to leave while also being shouted at, which, if you're performing sexual drag shows in front of kids, if the worst thing that happens to you is you get confronted about it outside and verbally asked, are you ashamed of that? You're getting off pretty light. All of this seems to keep happening no matter how much outrage we have. And I think it's because we handicap ourselves in this fight. See, we refuse to say that some things are right and that some things are wrong. And just because you think otherwise doesn't change that. Drag for kids is wrong. Drag for adults is wrong. It's wrong whether you say it's right and I say it's wrong. It doesn't matter. It's wrong. Far-left ideology doesn't have to deal with this concern. And that's, again, why we are losing on this issue quite a bit. They don't have to worry about what's right and what's wrong. Their frame is completely different. They say adults and children can do drag because why would it be wrong if they wanted to? If that's what they feel like doing, if that's what guides their identity, why is it wrong? They say, why do we have to bow down to your notion of wrong? What even is wrong, you hateful bigot? Stop trying to impose your views. That's what's being said. And conservatives are like, you're right. Why am I trying to impose my view on you? So the answer to that is quite simply, yes, you impose your view on them. You say this is right and that's wrong, and I don't care if you flip-flop it. I don't care if you say what's evil is good and if what's good is evil. Because there are inherently wrong things. This is one of them. Because boys and men using makeup to approximate the image of a woman, to walk and prance around as if they're a woman, to dance provocatively in this woman face, especially to do it as a kid, is wrong. It's perverting of nature. There's a reason men are men and women are women. That's another thing that leftists don't like. That men are men and women are women, and that's immutable no matter how much you scar yourself or how many hormones you take. It's still wrong because there are right things and wrong things. And not only is it because of nature that makes this right and wrong, doing this leads people down a path towards thinking that a trans identity is a good thing. You've seen the rise of many people taking up the trans identity right alongside with kids bringing their parents bringing their kids to these drag shows. And it's not a one-to-one correlation, but it's there. All of it is evil and wrong, and I don't care if you call me a bigot. I don't care if you say stop being hateful. It's not out of hate that I'm saying this. It's because there's right and wrong, and sometimes you have to call out right and wrong no matter what people call you. So here's the key to all this. We have to be consistent. You have to be on an individual level consistent. And you have to consistently call out right or wrong. You have to have courage to stand up when you know you're going to be called hateful things, when you know you're going to be labeled as a bigot, as a hater, as a evil religious fanatic. You got to know it's coming, and you have to have the gut to say it's still wrong. When we're engaged in this, we have to get that message out and let our arguments be more convincing than the other side. And when you look at it, if you look at an actual woman and a man dressed as a woman side by side, which one's more convincing? Which one's more convincing? We have to win. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We have to win. We have to ask candidates, political candidates, what they think on this, and then make sure that we vote for the people who stand with us on this. And then we have to give them the mandate to go in and say, hey, this is wrong, let's make it wrong at the state, local, and federal level. That's how we get governors to do the things like Ron DeSantis has in Florida, where they are actually looking into investigating families who take their kids to these drag shows as a form of child abuse. That's how you get governors like Governor Abbott in Texas, who are saying, hey, if you start giving your gender affirming, quote unquote, therapies, quote unquote, to minors, we are going to look into you as child abuse, because that's what it is. Homework assignment here. Go look up a picture of a young person who's had a double mastectomy and tell me that's not inherently wrong. Especially when they do it off the evil. It's not wrong if they have to do it for a life-saving treatment. 100% wrong if these doctors do it because these minors are thinking that they're something they're not. But to backtrack just a little bit, the fact that we're not willing to do this very often is why we are losing. And it is a weakness as conservatives. We believe in small government. We believe that it shouldn't intrude into private lives as much as humanly possible. We refuse to use power when we have it, and I can hear you. I can hear you screaming through me, through that screen right there, saying, but if we do it, they're going to do it too. So let me clue you into something. They have no qualms to forcing their agenda down on your throat through power. This isn't us starting a fight. Me saying that we need to use political power when we have it to keep these kids safe. To proclaim that men pretending to be women is wrong. This isn't us starting a fight. This is us finally engaging in it, because that is what the left has been doing, and that is what we must do if we're ever going to have a chance of changing the culture and changing the mindset around this to where it is absolutely, abhorrently, repugnantly evil for a family to bring their 5-year-olds to a drag show with men wearing almost nothing and layers of makeup because it is wrong. And it's what we have to do if we want to protect these kids. So, there's a slippery slope that we have been tracking for a while now. Kids doing drag is just part of that slope. But by far not the last stop. No. This hill goes down a lot farther than that. There is so much more depravity than just kids doing drag, which, side note, is sad to think about, that dressing up boys in girls' clothes and makeup and having them dance and wiggle and writhe, weirdly in front of sick, freakish adults. It's terrible that that's not the bottom, and not even by a long shot. Because in that scenario, generally these adults are only looking creepily at the kid. They're only staring with weird gusto as this kid does what they do. No, it is much worse than that. And this is why we need to fight this fight from the top of the hill down as far as it goes before we can put an end to it. The term minor attracted people is a term that is unfortunately becoming more and more common in today's discourse. You hear it not as much as you will in the next 2 or 3 years, but it is replacing the term pedophiles. They call them MAPs, minor attracted people. If you ever hear that, your first thought should be pedophile, and if someone calls themselves or someone else a MAP, well, you might need to cut them off. It is replacing pedophiles, and pedophilia is becoming one of those things we have to fight simply because it is wrong morally. In the last segment, we talked about some things are wrong morally. Doesn't matter what you say about it. Doesn't matter if the whole world thinks it's right. It is not right. And we saw in USA Today at the beginning of the year, they ran an op-ed. It was very weird. They took it down, changed the name on their Twitter profile, but its whole goal was to make pedophilia seem not nearly as bad as it is. Granted, it's hard to, in just words, describe how bad pedophilia is. But, you know, there's one thing to try to describe it, another to downplay it completely. You've seen professors try to argue that there's nothing wrong with it. We saw a professor who decided that even 1-year-olds, it's fine. Just infants. They're just infants. They're just small humans. They're just small adults. They'll eventually get there. Why do we need to wait? Still haven't heard if that guy has, been fired and thrown into jail like he should have been. Maybe even the electric chair, but we can only hope. But through all this, most people still espouse that pedophilia is wrong and act with contempt toward people who engage with it, as they rightly should. If you diddle a little kid, you should be thrown in the darkest jail cell, and maybe it should be left unlocked along with the neighbor and the other neighbor and the 3 other Jared Fogel. Let's say, yeah. I'm not saying that's a bad thing that happened. Not everybody thinks it's a bad thing. Not even everybody who's not a pedophile thinks it's a bad thing. Because we drive headlong into a madness that this entire country seems to be experiencing on child sexuality. Now, someone is eventually going to fully embrace the mantle of normalizing adults using children to satisfy their sick sexual urges. Everything surrounding these baits, if we can't win, is pushing in that direction. Kids doing drag is sexualizing them, because that's what drag is by definition. But it's more than that. As we talked about before, kids being able to quote unquote pick what gender they are. Little boys saying that they can be little girls. Little girls saying they can be little boys. Then, of course, there's all the other weird non-genders that supposedly you can be that do not exist. Fortunately, they're all mental illnesses people suffer with, and instead of getting some sort of help, people just push them into that life. And once you're in, it's so much harder to get out of. But there's a reason they do it. Because if these kids are adult enough, quote unquote adult enough, to be able to pick what gender they are, why aren't they old enough to consent to sex? If kids are adult enough to say, if a little girl says, I am a boy, and has a double mastectomy where they cut off healthy, living, thriving body tissue for a mental illness, something that's never going to come back, why aren't they old enough to consent to sex? That's where we find our standard bearer. Now, this happened in California back in 2020. It kind of flew under the radar because people aren't wanting to make these things open quite yet. They don't have the support they need quite yet to really push this. But as we've seen, it's coming. People are slowly gravitating to this as sickness and depravity continue to roll across this nation. So what did California do back in 2020? It's called Senate Bill 145. And of course it's California doing this, being on the leading edge of whatever the next perversion is. Them in New York, they can't stop. I don't know why, but they can't stop. Let me read you a little bit of this. And I want to read directly from the bill, and then I'll explain it. So, notwithstanding paragraph 1, a person convicted of a violation of subdivision B of section 286, all of that, shall not be required to register if, at the time of the offense, the person is not more than 10 years older than the minor, as measured from the minor's date of birth to the person's date of birth, and the conviction is the only one requiring the person to register. This is register for the sex offender list. Now, that's a lot of fancy words, basically to say that if someone has sex with a minor, they're 10 years apart or less, and it was consensual sex, and there was no rape involved, there was no anything outside of that would be considered illegal, that they won't have to register for the sex offender list, even though they 100% should have to register for the sex offender list for life. To put that in even simpler terms, and this is just an example, but if I, as a 25-year-old, were to sleep with a 15-year-old and it was consensual, I would not have to register for the sex offender list if I were to be brought up on charges for this in the state of California. Let your mind wrap itself around that. Let your mind really think through not only this step, but take a look at what this normalizes. Yeah, go there in your mind, because this is what they want to push across the country. We all inherently know this is wrong, especially if you happen to be a dad of a 15-year-old. Like, I don't even know how they exist in California anymore, because I don't know. I'd probably want to get out of California if the legislator made it to where if someone slept with my daughter at 15 and they were 24, 25, they didn't have to register for the sex offender list. Yeah, I wouldn't want to live there. But it doesn't stop at 15-year-olds. That's the really bad thing. It doesn't stop there. No, this particular bill goes down to 14-year-olds. Now that's where they were able to get away with so far. But let's take this to its logical conclusion, shall we? Because why stop at 14? What's magical about the number 14? Why not 13? Why not 12? Why not 10? Why even wait till double digits? You say female puberty starts around 8. Why not start then? Why should puberty even matter? Especially if puberty can supposedly be held off with blockers with no lasting ill effect. If you ever hear that, someone ever tells that to you to your face, laugh at them, mock them. Yeah, supposedly these children can make this decision to take those puberty blockers. And because of that, why do you need to stop at 8? Why not just follow the way of the professor? Yeah, there's a 1-year-old. Oh, I didn't. 1-year-old consented. Why are you trying to put me on the registry for that? If I waited 13 years, it wouldn't have mattered. Are you starting to see why this slippery slope that conservatives talk about are important? Are you starting to see why the fight on this slippery slope is important? Seriously, because some people think that it's okay to start down this slippery slope, and then we get down to the part where it gets harder and harder to stop. They're like, why didn't we do anything about this? This is the time. This is the time right now. You want to protect your kids. If you want to protect your kids' kids, and so on and so forth, on down the line, you have to call out this evil. So you have to be looking for it. You can't just hope you come across it. That's not how evil works most of the time. You have to shine a light on it. You have to give it nowhere to hide, not around you. Only then can we fight back against this madness that is consuming our culture. Only then, as I said before, can we protect these kids. If you like this episode of the Canceled Misfits Show, make sure to like, subscribe, comment on it, and also share it to your favorite social media site. That helps me, and it helps me bring more content to you. So I can't wait to see you next time. Until then, stay safe. And remember, if you're doing something that gets a liberal to try and cancel you, you are probably doing the right thing. See ya.